Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning, and so I just got back in from teaching a summer session. So if I'm a little slow right now, just you have to pardon me. um, yeah, I always think it's interesting. I was telling the students that I was going to do this talk today, and they said, well, wow, you have an interesting life. I mean, just anybody would be interested in this. And so hopefully at the end of this talk, I'll explain a little bit about why I'm here in Madison and my trajectory of why I'm even sitting in this seat and being able to talk about all these things, let alone just being in Madison. So the first slide here, from the streets of New York to the halls of the world, sort of sums it up. I was very fortunate in my life. I grew up in New York, and when I was in elementary school, now hopefully, wait a minute, now I gotta hope this, I can't, let's see, okay. When I was in elementary school, a couple of my friends, I grew up in Spanish Harlem, by the way, and a couple of my friends, one was Greek and one was Italian, were talking about auditioning for the Metropolitan Opera. I'd never been to an opera. My father was a construction worker, and the guys that he worked with for 25, 30 years were first generation Irish, Italian, German, what have you. And these were blue collar men, hard drinking, fast smoking guys, poker playing guys. And I'd never been to an opera, or let alone heard about, this kind of music, but I sang in the chorus. And so Michael and Chris, also my two friends I was just mentioning, they were in the chorus with me. And I heard them talking about auditioning for the opera, for the Met. And all I knew is that I just wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to, hang out, the age of 10, 11 years old. So my mother came up to parent teacher day and said there was an opportunity for me. And, and the teacher said, I wanted to do this. So, my mother was always the kind of parent, if there was an opportunity for one of her children, she was right there 200%. So, I mean, early on, she asked me and I said yes. And she took me down to the Metropolitan Opera. And I remember she put a little nice white shirt on me with a clip-on tie. And we stood in line with all these other people and, parents or mothers with their children. And I went into the room when it was my turn with the great Zubin Mehta and one of the rehearsal pianists. And Zubin Mehta said, well, what are you going to sing for us today? And I had prepared America, because that's what we used to sing in the chorus in school, assembly and all of that. So I sang that, and then, the pianist, they were testing me for my pitch and all of that. And I went home, and a couple of weeks later, I got a, postcard in the mail stating that I had made the Met. And actually, Chris, one of the two friends, made it as well, but Michael didn't. And so it was great being with my friend. And that experience, there's an old theater expression that says the sawdust went up my nose. That's where it really began. Spectacle. We were 10, 11 years old, learning all these different languages. Even though I grew up in Spanish Harlem, I could sort of speak Spanglish, but not, French or German or anything like that. And so that was a terrific experience for me. And I was also into music. My mother had given me piano lessons and such. And then I wasn't so much into that. Then I had violin lessons because I thought it was cool to carry a violin case. But in the neighborhood I lived in, I used to get picked on, even though I was tall and, I was into sports and stuff like that. Some of the older kids would pick on me. That's okay. But so as far as a musical instrument goes, I settled for the drums, go figure, a loud instrument. And I started to study privately and, was getting really good at it. But I always loved old movies on television. To be 8 years old, pre-Met, to be 8 years old, 9 years old, sitting in front of the television set on a Saturday afternoon, pardon me, Sunday, looking at these old movies and crying, being emotionally moved by watching, these movies like Tale of Two Cities with Ronald Colman, or, The Grapes of Wrath with Henry Fonda. And I'm sitting there, little kid with glasses in the living room and crying. And I was terrified. I didn't know what was going on with me. I didn't. And I was ashamed to tell my mother. I thought something was wrong with me. And I was just like any other child, sort of indulging my fantasy, thinking I'm Superman, and my brothers and my sister, jumping from chair to couch and flying and all that stuff. But the Met really opened my sort of senses to spectacle. So a few years later, when I was in 8th grade, I raised my hand during career day, and actually prior to that, in junior high school, I guess they call it middle school today, someone was brought to the school, a guest, and it was Earle Hyman, who I will be talking about. Earl was the reason that I did my doctoral dissertation. But anyway, Earl came to the school, he was a guest, and we didn't know anything about his career, but he was talking about acting and, some of the stuff that he had done. And, I was blown away by this. And then my teacher took us to see a performance of Shakespeare's Othello. A great teacher. And so anyway, when I was in the 8th grade, I raised my hand and I said, is there a school that teaches people how to act in New York? Because I was very good in math and science, and they thought I was going to go to a specialized high school or something, Bronx High School of Science, Stuyvesant in New York. And my teacher, Mr. Morrow, said there's the High School of Performing Arts, and that I would have to audition. I didn't know. I said, what do I need to do? And he said, you got to get a couple of monologues. And I didn't know what that was. I knew what songs were, of course, but so I went to the library, and with the help of another teacher, picked out a couple of monologues, and my teacher, Mr. Ward, sort of looked at them and helped me. And, just like anything else, I would go home and get involved in my imagination in the close the bedroom door and just act out these characters. So I went to performing arts, and went down to performing arts and auditioned, and I made it. And that was a tremendous experience. And I don't know how serious I was, really. I wasn't as serious as some of my other friends that when they graduated, they were going to Yale and Juilliard and various other places. I was busy hanging out, having a lot of girlfriends and playing basketball and all that, and playing music. Acting was just something that I enjoyed. I didn't think about it for a career, really. And then Earle Hyman, who I had was introduced to in junior high school, and we had class had seen him do Othello. He was one of the guests at Performing Arts. Again, it's how the universe kept bringing this man in my consciousness. And there were a slew of other people that came to Performing Arts as well. Eli Wallach, if some of you are familiar with that name, Eli Wallach has passed away, and so is Earl, by the way. Eli Wallach and some of the great acting teachers who have passed, Uta Hagen, Sanford Meisner, and such. And so again, by that time, though, I was well aware of the kinds of work that Earl was doing in New York City. But then he talked about his experiences in Norway and this career that he had developed in Norway, starting back to the mid to late 1950s. Where did this PowerPoint just go? Doggone it. Can you, let me just make sure. Hey, it's live. What can I do? Well, I might have to, okay.
There it is. It's coming back.
And say folks, it's live, it's Zoom. So many actors have dealt with this over the past year or so. So anyway, when it was time to graduate and all my friends were going off to school, in the 4 years of high school, it was college preparatory, so we had math, science, and all that. And then I was doing plays during the summer, summer plays and such. And before I knew it, it was graduation, and I went, oh, what am I going to do with my life? So I went by the Navy recruiting office in Broadway, and, I went in and talked to the recruiter. I didn't know. And he said, I took the test, and he said, you score pretty high on math and science. We could use you in the nuclear propulsion program in the Navy. And I said, well, I'd like to discuss this with my parents. So I went home, and my father, I remember it was an afternoon, and he was watching the ball game on television. And I said, Dad, I just took the test for the Navy, and I scored high in math and science, and they want me to sign the papers and be submarine duty for 6 years, working with nuclear reactors and all that. And I remember my father looked up at me and he said, I thought you said you wanted to be an actor. Yeah, he's never talked to me like that before. Old school guy. And a light went off. I said, maybe I should try to get serious about this. So I got a summer job in a department store, a brand new department store. And again, how you're led to certain folks. There was a playwright named, there is a playwright and producer named Richard Viteri, and Richard was working as a security guard. And we met. I was on the maintenance crew, and we met, and he used to ask me, what did I do? And I said, I just got out of performing arts. I'm an actor. And he said he was a playwright. And I said, yeah, right. And I guess he was looking at me going, yeah, right, you're an actor. And so he said he had just written a play that was going to be produced off Broadway. And he said, there's a part in there for you. We haven't cast yet. And so, but you got to go to New York. There's Earl. And you have to go to Manhattan. This was out in Queens where we were. And so basically I traveled into Manhattan down to the Village and auditioned for the play and got the part. And that's where the agents started. I started getting a lot of commercial work. Actually, when I was at the Met, I started doing a couple of commercials. My mother took me to a couple of commercial auditions that we had, the kids found out about being at the Met. And I started traveling outside of New York. The agents started getting me jobs, or I started getting jobs where I was traveling outside of New York. And one of the jobs was at a regional theater in Baltimore Center Stage. And I met two great mentors in my life during that show. They were in another show, but they would come into the rehearsals for the show that I was doing. And one was Randall Duke Kim, who's the founder of American Players Theater, and a British actress named Megwin Owens. She was on a series a number of years ago called Upstairs, Downstairs. But Randy and his partner, Annie Occhiogrosso, they were the founders of APT. And so Meg said that I should audition for drama school in London. Here again, somebody's telling me something. I'm going, what? And she's friends with Derek Jacobi. Maybe you know who Derek Jacobi is. I, Claudia's, Hamlet, a slew of other things. He's a wonderful actor. So he wrote me a letter and told me what I had to do. And this sort of coincided with me making about maybe $30,000 a part on a television movie in New York. And so by the time RADA was coming into New York, I had filled out the application and everything. And so they came to New York and I auditioned, and, I was a little bit seasoned by then, and I made it. And I spent all of that $30,000 going to school. Now, some of my other classmates came from money, and I had to spend that money. And then I had to also work part-time, bussing tables in a nightclub in London. But that was a terrific experience for me because I had been working, as I said, before I went over. So I put that on hold, and the agents were great. And then I came back to New York after the 4 years, 3 years, and I stayed over for a year. And then, I had gotten my first soap opera, and then, made some money. I started doing a lot of voiceovers, and then I had gotten another soap opera, for a year and a half. And that's good work for an actor in New York. And then I went out to California, and all this while I was acting, traveling and doing shows at places like the Guthrie, if you're familiar with the Guthrie in Minneapolis and all that. And by that time I had a base in California, so it was no problem to fly to do shows, and they were flying me in. And then I was sitting at a Shakespeare my dressing room at one of the Shakespeare festivals at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and my dressing room mate used to have a lot of books on the dressing room table, history books of the theater, biographies and such. And my dressing room mate said, you know, you really love this stuff. I mean, you really, really do. It's just not a hobby. You're always talking about it. Why don't you audition for, why don't you apply for a PhD program? And I said, are you kidding? A PhD? What do I, by that time, my house was almost paid off in California. And so I said, well, I don't know what I would write about. But I thought about Earle Hyman. And I said, wait a minute, if I was to do a PhD, because Earle Hyman, his career has a lot of sensibilities to me, certainly with my career. And I would be interested in writing about his Norwegian career, about how an African-American man in the 1950s went over to Norway before the buzzwords of multiculturalism and immigration and all this other stuff were really hot button topics in Europe. And so I said, maybe I could write a dissertation about that. So I applied to, and I needed the Scandinavian, right? So UW has one of the top 2 programs in the country. So I applied to UW, Seattle, Minneapolis, University of Minnesota. And UW-Madison let me know immediately, early. And so I said, why not? So I came up, and it took me 2 years to do the coursework. I doubled up my credits. I learned Norwegian. That was my language for the dissertation. I couldn't take Spanish or French for reading knowledge. I had to take 2 years worth of Norwegian. And it was tremendous. 19th century Scandinavian literature, all of that, Ibsen, Strindberg, Camilla Collette, all of that stuff. At the same time, being in the theater department and working professionally. They had never seen anybody like me, a PhD student working professionally at the same time they're trying to complete a PhD with all the papers you have to write and all the seminars you have to attend. But I did it. I had learned how to survive on less sleep, when I lived out in, my father, by the way, moved us out to the suburbs when I was about 11, 12, when I was still at the Met, because he wanted us to have a yard to play in. So I always had to get up early and travel into Manhattan when I was doing things there. And even when I was in high school for 4 years, traveled all the way into Manhattan each day. That was about an hour and a half. So you had to get up early. So I guess I've been hardwired this way. So I was able to complete that. And actually my last year, I did a television series in Green Bay, Wisconsin at the same time I was finishing my last year of PhD studies. Like I said, it took 2 years, right? It was very intense. So I did that, and it was pretty incredible. And then a couple of my professors thought I should apply for a Fulbright. And I said, a Fulbright to go to Norway? I mean, don't you have to be a genius to get one of those? I was just an actor doing a PhD. And they said, no, we think you really have something to say. And if you're going to be writing about Earle Hyman, you need to go over there. So I applied to the Fulbright Foundation and to the American Scandinavian Foundation. And as luck would have it, I won both. I can't believe it. I won both. And before I had got the notification for those, I was inducted into the Sons of Norway. Can you believe it? Here in Madison. So anyway, I went over to Norway, met a lot of Earl's contemporaries, and that was where the world started to open up for me. Let me try to advance some of these. Now, prior to Earle, when I was here at school, I was also researching the career of the 19th century actor, Ira Aldridge, who's one of the greatest actors during the 19th century. He left the United States in 1823 and went over to London. And, slavery was a huge issue still here at that time. And he went over, even though he was in New York, when most of his brethren were in chains in this country. And he became a tremendous star. It took him a few years, but he became a tremendous star, made his base in London, but he traveled all over the continent. We're talking trains, we're talking coaches, we're talking boats. I mean, this man, what he did, the roles that he did were incredible, just absolutely incredible. So I was enamored by his career, and I thought, of course, that there would be parallels with Earle Hyman, and there certainly are, because in that trajectory, it would be Ira Aldridge, and then Paul Robeson, who some of you may remember who Paul Robeson was, and then Earle Hyman. Just some pictures here. I mean, where he went, the Russians swear that he taught them Shakespeare, and I've been to Russia many, many times and spoke. I've performed in Russia, this one-man show that I've put together. And Ira Aldridge was also friends with Mikhail Shchepkin, who was before Stanislavski. That's a name some of you may remember. Stanislavski is the godfather of modern day acting theory, certainly in the 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, and people still study his techniques and teach Stanislavski technique. But Shchepkin died the year that Konstantin Stanislavski was born, but he was the great actor of the Malley Theater, the Little Theater. So Aldridge and Shchepkin became friends, and also Aldridge became friends with another Ukrainian poet and writer by the name of Taras Shevchenko. So all of this stuff I was uncovering. And Shevchenko was jailed by the Tsar for speaking out against, oppression of the serfs and all this treatment and all that stuff. So of course, he and Aldridge had particular sympathies and commonalities, but towards, trying to always fight against oppression, any people. Of course, Aldridge for his Black and brown brothers back in the United States, and Taras Shevchenko for his folk. This is Aldridge's grave in Poland. He died in 1867 while he was on tour. I've been to this grave many times when I'm in Łódź, which is spelled L-O-D-Z, but in Polish it's pronounced Łódź. So he died on tour there, and whenever I'm in Łódź, I visit his grave. Some of the roles that he did in the 19th century. Can you believe this, folks? I mean, look at this. I mean, some of these pictures I got in Russia, and some of these are in the public domain. But he would put this makeup on his face, maybe he'd put this white makeup on his face, but he would leave his hands without any makeup on to, show folks, that he was who he was in acting these roles. And this was just a little shout out to him, because about 2-3 years ago, I acted Lear. It was a tremendous production, and so I dedicated that performance to Ira Aldridge and actually Earle Hyman. That's me, and then that's Charlie Sexton on the right playing Gloucester. That was great. That's wonderful. Some of the other actors that were tremendous influences for me in my career to give me the strength to be role models for me in the classical theater, in the classic vein, certainly in this country, Gloria Foster, who some of you know, and if you ever saw the movie The Matrix, she was the Oracle, but she had a tremendous career in this country. And I worked with her on Broadway, and Colleen Dewhurst. I don't know if you know, some of you may know the name Colleen Dewhurst. Morgan Freeman, and Gloria Foster in Coriolanus. This was at Joe Papp's Shakespeare Theater. So I was around all of this stuff growing up, seeing this. Raul Julia, or Raul Julia, you probably know him. I mean, some of you, if you've seen The Addams Family, you may know him, recognize him from that, but he was also a tremendous classical actor. These are people you'd see. You'd run into them at auditions or see them in the street, and go to see shows. And, Hector Elizondo, another one who lived in my neighborhood, my neighborhood for my first apartment. Some of you will know him from Chicago Hope. Pretty Woman, I guess he was the manager there, but he did a slew of things. It was great, great man. I used to see him in the health food store, and he would stop me and we would talk all the time. Here's Randy. one of the founders of APT, one of the greatest actors this country has ever produced. His instrument, his voice. He really taught me a lot of things and schooled me, because he used to change his features for particular one-man shows that he would do of Walt Whitman, and he could change his features with makeup and such to look Caucasian. I mean, but that was his artistry, not just to put white makeup on his face and all this stuff, but he changed to look like these characters and embody these characters. Randy was tremendous. And some people who are listening in or this presentation, maybe you saw him on stage back in the day or so. Great actor. He belonged in a different century, actually. He's from the 19th century, 17th century. I used to sit at his feet and just listen to him. And a lot of you know who James Earl Jones is. Another he came to performing arts as well and talked to us. We were New York City street kids in performing arts, high school. We came from rich backgrounds, poor backgrounds, black, white, yellow, green, you name it. That was the only school that all of us neurotic 14 to 18-year-olds could be in, for music, dance, and drama. What a tremendous, and I'm still friends with quite a few people from my class. We've had these Zoom gatherings since COVID. Lloyd Richards, I worked with Lloyd. He was the dean of the Yale School of Drama. And some of you have heard of the playwright August Wilson, championed a lot of August's work to Broadway with Lloyd Richards, tremendous theater person. These were all people that gave me tremendous, I could do this, looking at them. Now, Ian McKellen, who a lot of you know. Now I'm fast forwarding actually after the PhD, because when I was coming back from Norway, I have 4 now, as Lisa said, but that was right after 9/11. It was hell to travel overseas after 9/11. I went over 2 weeks after. So later, when I came back, I shared an agent. Ian McKellen and I had the same agent at one point. Can you believe it? And so Deb Miller was telling me that I should go see him in a show that he was touring with Richard III. And this was in New York at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. So I was going to New York, and that's why Deb said, well, you should go by the theater, get a ticket, and just tell Ian how much you like working with the agency. So, I wrote a note, and after the show, went backstage, and immediately I was let in. And by the time I had went back there, he'd already pulled off his costume and he was in his t-shirt and Levi's. And we sat in the dressing room for 45 minutes talking. He was so impressed with my career, and I was so impressed with, besides what he's done as an actor, he also is the patron saint of a school in Los Angeles called the Hobart School. And many of these students at the Hobart School come from immigrant backgrounds, Asian, Southeast Asian, and such, Hispanic. And these kids can speak Shakespeare better than some adults that I know. Their teacher at the time that taught them. So McKellen was a patron, and Michael York, if some of you remember who Michael York is. So anyway, that's what McKellen was so blown away with, that I knew who that was. And that's where that sort of relationship with him solidified. And then I saw him again later when he was doing his one-man show during the Gay Games. And a lot of you know him maybe from Lord of the Rings or something. You shall not pass. And his buddy, Patrick Stewart, is very good friends with a friend of mine. So actually, before I came to Madison, I went out drinking with Patrick Stewart and my friend, and no one knew who Patrick Stewart was. And Patrick Stewart, he was coming out to begin Star Trek. And he said, he's going to make more money in the first year of Star Trek than he's ever made in his entire career. He was absolutely right. And everything else that he's gone on with. So, those two have been Derek Jacobi, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Hugh Corshi, Josette Simon, a slew of other actors that, you know who they are, you've seen. And if you love the Brits, if you like Maggie Smith, Judi Dench, Joan Plowright, who was the widow of Laurence Olivier, and I believe it's Eileen Heckert. It's called Tea Time with the Dames, I believe. You can find it. And they're talking about their careers, and it's just wonderful to see them in their glory, sitting in Joan Plowright's, backyard of her abbey or wherever her house is in the country, and they're talking. So, it's just wonderful. One of the great pleasures of my performing career was being one of the first Americans that was part of the company of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival of Canada. And one of my great friends, who was the equivalent of Colleen Dewhurst, Susan Wright, became very close to me. She was one of the ones that championed me coming up, because I had gone up there to visit some people, and I was hanging out one night and I met her and Jimmy Blindick, and they were still auditioning for their season, but being an American, I didn't have a green card. So they arranged an audition for me, and John Neville, who was the artistic director at the time, you may know him from, certain things on television and film, Baron Munchausen, amongst a whole bunch of other things. And they were impressed with my resume and my time in London and all of that. And so I auditioned for him and came back to Los Angeles. And a few months later, maybe it was about 4 months later, I got a call from John. He said, Baron, so what are you doing next season? And I was like, well, I don't know yet. He said, how would you like to come to Stratford and be with us? And I just, actually that week about that week, I had also gotten an offer to understudy a name in a Broadway show that was going on tour. And the manager at the time wanted me to take the Broadway show, or the pre-Broadway tour of this Tom Stoppard play called Hapgood. And he was excited, because of the money and all of that. And if it went to Broadway, that would have made my star even rise more. So anyway, I decided to take Stratford, and needless to say, that ruptured that relationship. Yeah, there's John as Baron Munchausen. He and Richard Burton were two of the golden boys of the British theater during the time that Peter O'Toole was coming up, and Albert Finney, Tom Courtney, all of that, if you recognize those names. Also, one of the great actors, Nicky Pinnell. I learned so much about verse speaking from Nicky, and he and I were on stage actually the night that Olivier passed. And Nicky was British, but he'd been living in Canada for a number of years. And actually, I remember we were doing Titus Andronicus, and I was playing Aaron, and he was playing Titus. And so he stepped to the fore of the stage, and he asked the house lights to come up, and he spoke about his experiences with Olivier, and he asked for a moment of silence. I'll never forget that. Actually, that was beautiful. And back to Earle. Of what I learned about this man and what he did and how he was revered in Norway. And the people spoke about the love. And so I stayed in touch with him, of course, when I came back from Norway, but I started writing to finish the dissertation. And I also started writing articles about Ira Aldridge and about Earle Hyman and about Shakespeare and about Ibsen, and going to give talks at various places. I couldn't believe all this stuff, when I was in Norway, I actually held the prompt books that Ibsen wrote in. I was allowed down to the vaults and held one of those. And I had a fantasy if I had like one of those sci-fi ray guns to sort of like make it a miniature, pardon me, and put it in my pocket, I guess that would be worth millions or quite a few bucks. But I mean, you know, it was just an honor and a privilege to be, to hold one of the prompt books that Ibsen wrote. And Ibsen, if those of you that don't know, perhaps you remember his play, A Doll's House or Hedda Gabler. Those are two of the big plays, certainly. Ghosts. And let me tell you a story about Earle, of how Earle became enamored with Norway. When he was 13 years old, so that would have been 1939, and some of you will know that was the golden age or the golden year of Hollywood. Mr. Chips, Gunga Din, The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, all these movies. And his mother opened up the newspaper and said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And she thought he would have said, some kind of a toy or something to go to the movies, because that was The Wizard of Oz. So she opened it up to the movie section, but he also saw an ad for something called Ghost. Now here's a 13-year-old African-American child, and he thought it might've been a scary kind of thing. He didn't know anything about Ibsen. So that was the last tour of an actress by the name of Alla Nazimova. And it was in a tour out in one of the theaters out in Brooklyn, out there at that time, one of these little road houses. It's no longer there anymore. And he spent his little 50 cents or whatever it was to go up in the balcony. And 13 years old, being entranced by osmosis of what was happening on the stage. Maybe he didn't understand everything in the play, certainly, but it resonated with him, even though that was a translation. And at the age of 13, he decided to learn Norwegian at the age of 13, 14, just like with me going to performing arts, to learn to read the plays in the original language, or the original sprach, as the Norwegians say. And that's where his love affair began. And he always had a dream of doing Shakespeare. But at that time, African-American actors, with all of the discrimination and the second-class citizenship and everything else, the roles that folks were relegated to at that time in movies, and for the majority of the theater. But he had a dream to do theater and be a part of, these repertory companies like Eva Le Gallienne and all of these other, the Civic Repertory Theater, an 18-year-old. And there was one of Paul Robeson's idols and Earl's idols was a man by the name of Canada Lee, who was also blacklisted. If you remember the Hitchcock film Lifeboat, he was the black stevedore that read Lord's prayers. Beautiful. I mean, you'd never seen a black man talking like that in movies in the 1940s. So anyway, he took Earl under his wing when Earl was 17, 18 years old, and Earl got a radio job, doing a voiceover. So, I mean, it's all connected with these particular people who have been tremendous role models and idols for people to emulate. Anne Jackson and Eli Wallach, you might remember their faces, particularly Eli Wallach. They were married, of course, and Anne Jackson went to high school with Earle Hyman at Franklin K. Lane High School in Brooklyn. They were very helpful. The two of them were very helpful to my dissertation, to my research. Besides, like I said, besides Earl's tremendous love, he didn't get to Norway until 1956, 57. He was able to get whatever roles he could in Shakespeare in New York, Othello, maybe The Prince of Morocco and The Merchant of Venice. He was able to do Hamlet, and actually he was coached by John Gielgud. Owen Dodson directed him. He's a young man here in 1951, so he would have been 25 here. And then later, he was able to be the first African-American to be cast at the American Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Connecticut. The first to really integrate that company. And he had said that he asked them why, they asked him why did he want to be in the company? And he said, well, it's called the American Shakespeare Festival, isn't it? And they said, well, he's right. And they cast him over the next 5 or 6 years. in particular roles, Dunois and St. Joan, here he goes. Certainly Othello with Alfred Drake, who was a great musical theater star, Broadway theater star. Yeah, Jacqueline Brookes. It's a younger Prince of Morocco, Autolycus in The Winter's Tale. And also, if you've heard, you know the play title Raisin in the Sun. He was in the first American cast that went over in 1959, but they weren't ready for that play the way that it was revolutionary for the Broadway American theater. But he played Walter Lee. In the film version, you probably, if you've seen it, Sidney Poitier played on Broadway and created the role in film. 1964 on one of his trips there. So he went over in 1956, 57, and he was doing a radio interview, and Bjarne Andersen, who was the artistic director of the Den Nationale Scene, the national stage, heard him talking in Norway and contacted him and asked him if he would consider doing Othello in Norwegian. Now, of course, they'd never had a real black man playing that role. And Earl was terrified. And he, demurely said, well, he'd think about it, but he didn't commit. And he came back over to the United States, and, he was doing a summer stock American production of, Othello. And if you know who John Lithgow is, the actor John Lithgow, his father, Arthur Lithgow, ran a Shakespeare festival, and Earl was in that Shakespeare festival. And during the performance, Earl started speaking Norwegian because he had looked at the script. He had the script, the translation, but I guess during the performance, a couple of lines came out in Norwegian, and so Lawrence Luckinbill was playing Iago, and I guess he saw Lawrence or Luckinbill's eyes go, like, what the hell did you just say? And so I guess Earl thought he was okay, he better give it a shot, and contacted Bjarne Andersen and went over and did Othello 1961, 62, and created Norwegian theater history again. And that's where it opened up for him, because all these other directors, Tormod Skagestad, the Det Norske Teatret, which is a different dialect. There are two dialects in Norwegian, Bokmål and Nynorsk, New Norwegian. And so this is the Norwegian theater, Det Norske Teatret. So he did Emperor Jones, right? 1964, of course, these black roles and such. And then about 1966, 67, the Afrikaneren with Lisa Fjellstad. I was able to really talk to Lisa. Her father was a very famous Norwegian conductor. But this was the first film to deal with the subject of an interracial relationship in Norway. So it was pretty groundbreaking at the time. And here, Earl again through the years. These are just a few different slides. Hjallabrui, sort of this bridge. It's a bridge actually, but it has all these religious themes in it. And here he is. He played Bishop Hawk, but of course he's talking to the Norwegian cast here in this shot, 1983. And then Driving Miss Daisy. Anna Gullestad, who plays Miss Daisy, was actually his Desdemona in his Othello at Den Nationale Scene. So they had a tremendous artistic partnership for years, and she was a big champion. As she moved into leadership positions, she was always championing Earl, because he would come over to Norway for maybe 6 months out of the year and then come back to New York for 6 months, or come back to the States and do things. And Anna's daughter told me a story that when she was 3 or 4 years old, when she met Earl for the first time, in the 60s or whatever, she had never seen a black man before. And so he was sitting in her parents' living room, and Earl was tall and, statuesque man. And she was sort of shocked because she thought his face was dirty. This is an innocent child. And she went back to the bathroom or whatever and got a towel and climbed on his lap and started rubbing his face. That's a true story. That's something. Isn't that something? So let's see. Some animation folks will remember Earl's voice from Thundercats, Panthro, and later in life, with some of his performances, like at the Atlantic Theater, Pence's The Room, The Cherry Orchard Fears. Yeah. 90 years old, 90 years young. God rest your soul, Earl. God rest your soul. Another person who was tremendous for me in my travels in Scandinavia. I went back, so I went right after 9/11, and then I went back again in 2008, a year before Anne passed away. She was the original Bess in Porgy and Bess. And I was introduced to her, and she took me under her wing like an auntie. And she, was on tour in the 1940s and met this Norwegian, and got married and had a couple of kids. And so her base was Norway, but she was tremendous in Norway for her, coaching and teaching. And there she is with Todd Duncan and Porgy and Bess. She was very overprotective of me. And that's the end. She was very overprotective of me in Norway. And most people, I get teased all the time when they talk about, well, you must stick out like a sore thumb in Norway, because people that really haven't traveled to Scandinavia think everybody's, over 6 feet tall and blonde haired and blue eyes, but that's not the case, certainly with issues of immigration and people that have migrated to Norway from Pakistan and the Philippines and Vietnam. So the children, the first, second generation and third generation now have grown up in Norway, speaking Norwegian and all of that. They're Norwegian. Lavleen Kaur was a great friend of mine in the Norwegian theater there. Beautiful. Lady from the Sea, Ibsen's The Lady from the Sea. Hedda Gabler for Riksteatret, the Norwegian Traveling Theater. Another actor that's done a lot of things. He's originally from Burkina Faso, and he's done things at the National Theater of Norway. I also had acted at the National Theater of Norway, but Isaka, he lives there, and so he's done some tremendous things. And that was one of the first plays I saw at the National Theater when the robbers came to Cardamom. So it's like Folkoroveri I Cardamonobi. And the children's theater piece was tremendous, and the way the children were looking at the stage. And I just said, I could be anywhere right now and seeing these children entranced. Another theater that started in 1991 to give a voice to a lot of the immigrant or children of immigrant folks in Norway, the Nordic Black Theater. So, creating original pieces, musicals and stuff. And this gentleman in the middle here, his name is Cliff Mustache, and he'd been living in Norway for a number of years. He's originally from Eritrea. And I've been in the cultural dialogue, in the cultural debates in Norway, because, coming from New York, and you saw all these people that were influences for me, and I was saying, wait a minute, you have all these actors here, and how come you don't cast them? Because the Norwegian scene pretty much is pretty white, except for the odd situation. And then, behind closed doors, people would say, well, they really can't speak the language, and that was a bunch of BS, bunch of BS, just to keep certain people out from getting these, seasonal contracts at these theaters. And that's changing a little bit more now, but not for the better. I mean, for the better, but not. And I don't know how many of you remember, what was it, 2010, 2011, there was this psychopath named Anders Breivik who went to one of the islands and killed about 70 people with a machine gun. It shocked the entire nation there. And it was a group of people out for, so I can't remember, it was like a summer camp, and he went there and all that. He's behind bars, and I know the jail system or the imprisonment system is a little bit different. They treat these prisoners in a more humane fashion, even people like this. But I remember when that happened, and people were going around thinking that it might have been Islamic terrorists, because my friend called me. I was in Taiwan teaching and directing, and my friend Oystein called me and he said, man, you know, if there were people with baby carriages or, you know, strollers, and they would look Islamic or, you know, from Pakistan or something, you know, you'd have Norwegians spitting on them on the streets. See, that didn't come out here in the news, you know, until it came out that then it was an ethnic Norwegian. And these very same hypocritical folks who were spitting on these people and cursing them in the streets, you know, were standing on the steps of the Raadhus, the government house in downtown Norway, with candles, you know, but it's human nature. What can you say? So, I mean, you know, my experiences in Norway opened up the world for me in many different ways. Now, what is it? I can't even remember how many countries I've been to. Certainly I've been on 5 continents. One thing has led to the next. You know, I give a talk, and then I've been very pleased and with the way things have worked out. And I'll tell you how I came here, and then I'll end. I had been asked at various times to teach at some of the national theater schools, the major training institutions in these countries. And that's been a tremendous experience for me, because I've become friends with all these actors in all these different countries. And I'm always interested in the theater history of particular countries. That's how I really became friends with a lot of Norwegians, because all the Americans were going, you know, that I went over with initially, they said, wow, how do you become friends with all these people? Because I remember when they marched us out to give our little speeches to the Fulbright board, pardon me, at this gala dinner, the scientists got up and talked about what they were doing, and there was polite applause. And then I got up and I said in Norwegian, I said, jeg heter Baron, jeg skriver om Earle Hyman, amerikanske skuespilleren, you know, America. And you know, basically I was saying, I'm here to write on Earle Hyman, American actor. And the audience erupted, because most of the people in that audience of that generation knew Earle Hyman. And so all the scientists were saying, God, what are you doing? What are you researching? Everybody knows what you're doing. And certainly everybody was polite applause for, you know, thermal energy or whatever these people were doing. Yeah, so it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey for me. And again, I grew up in the neighborhoods where a lot of people didn't have particular chances, or they, you know, went down the wrong path. You know, 1/3 of the guys I grew up with are dead. 1/3 are doing well, supporting families, you know, working for the post office and all that. And then 1/3 are, you know, just getting by. And here I am. I've traveled all over the world, and my experiences, my friends are really amazed at all this stuff, you know. Whenever I travel and I'm waiting for a plane at the gates, you know, people assume I'm in the military. They say, oh, you're so well spoken, and you know, what do you do? Are you in the military? What do you do? And my little joke has been, I said, no, I'm not in the military, but I teach nuclear physics. And everybody's head usually does one of these numbers. Oh, and then I say, no, I'm just teasing. I said, you know, I'm an actor and I teach theater. And people go, really? You teach theater? You have a PhD in theater? What the hell do you do with that?
Yep.
So it's been a hell of a journey and a hell of a ride, with all the TV and the plays and now here with me being here. I've come up to Madison for the past 18 years to take part in a program when I graduated since I've graduated called the Odyssey Project. And this project was started by Emily Auerbach, who is a tremendous angel of social justice, and she believes in helping people. That's to the core of her being, she believes this. And the criteria is she interviews about 100 people every summer. That's what she's told me. And the criteria is that these people have to be at the poverty level or below. All different challenges, immigrant status, to you name it. And she picks 30 every year. And if they complete the year, because she has professors from the UW come and teach philosophy, English, history, writing, has been tremendous. So she enlisted me to do whatever acting or public speaking. She arranges that. She's arranged that every year for me to come up and do this and help people with their job interviewing skills. And when they're reading particular plays, to help them and to help them with their poetry and helping people find their voices. And that's what I've done for 18 years. And there have been tremendous success stories. People have gone on to law school, social work. It's been tremendous. And then some, have still had challenges, but this has been a tremendous success story. So in 2019, on my annual trip, one of the deans, because over the past 10 years, I'd get approached and say, hey, would you ever consider coming back to UW? And I go, no, I'm fine. And so one of the deans approached me and asked me, he said, look, Baron, your colleagues would be really excited about you joining us. And I said, nah. And then he said the magic sentence. So what would it take to bring you here? Now we're talking. So then it took a full year of negotiations from February of 2019 until February of 2020 when COVID hit for me to say yes. And if I would have kept, because I kept putting them off, and every time I would say no, they would say yes. And so, and I have dear friends here. I don't think I would have come back if I didn't have a support unit and was able to do certain things. And the school said they're going to do certain things for me and support certain artistic endeavors that I want to do. I'm directing the opening show at Forward Theater downtown in September. Yeah. So that's me in a nutshell, folks. That's me in a nutshell. I hope it didn't put you to sleep with your pillows and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, thank you, Baron, very much. Very much. We've got a couple of comments and questions from Steve. He said, so many of your colleagues portrayed today live into their 10th decade of life. Would it be accurate when concluding that the life of an actor has many satisfactions that encourage such longevity?
Well, I don't know. This has been a tough year. There's been a lot of loss in the entertainment industry. I think people who are creative beings, and even if you like classical music, I love classical music, Yo-Yo Ma, Lang Lang, or Hilary Hahn, any of these great classical artists, you expand your consciousness and horizons in different ways. So you're alive in different ways. Certainly you've seen actors that are up in their 70s and 80s and they're doing plays and television and all that. I mean, these people like Richard Widmark and Fonda and all these people were acting up into their 80s and stuff, So for myself, I can only say that my father's oldest living brother was 99 and still being romantic with his wife at 99. So maybe I still have a chance.
Oh, well, Dina had asked what contemporary actors today are of the same caliber of those that you mentioned from days past.
Daniel Day-Lewis, Meryl Streep, Viola Davis, Christian Bale. I mean, Julianne Moore. There are actors that I could name who you wouldn't know,
right?
That are known in the theater world as well. But yeah, there are a few. I mean, you should hear Judi Dench, and people talk about the current crop of British actors now and how they don't project and use their voices and all that stuff. So I guess every generation has its own, what people consider is good, you know?
Let's see here. Great program. What is speaking in verse? And maybe that can be our last little wrap up for today.
Yeah, that's Shakespearean verse. When I say verse, even though there are other playwrights as well, Marlowe and all these other, Johnson and all these other folks. Shakespeare writes in something called iambic pentameter, which means that there are alternating weak and strong stresses. There are 5 feet in the line, 2 per line for blank verse. To be or not to be, that is the question. A regular line, 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. Now, that's not to say that you have to do it that way, but Shakespeare writes in that kind of meter. And the trick is to find out when it doesn't fit into that meter, something's going on psychologically. That's the bare bones, but that's verse speaking. And there are all these other rhetorical devices and things to look for, but that's blank verse pretty much, you know, and when a line scans regularly with that 2-10 beat. Yeah.
Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Edward had asked, it is indeed interesting how Black actors were eventually integrated into European theatrical productions. Do you think the time has come for Black actors to enter doors into their own homes? You say you have traveled all over the world. Have you ever been to Africa?
Oh, yeah. I've been to Ghana and I've been to Nigeria.
Awesome.
I want to bring a professor here that I met in Nigeria a couple of years ago.
Awesome.
The reason that things look different now, and it has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter, it's because populations are changing. And you have kids that have dreams of being musicians and dancers. And when these schools are letting these people in, slowly but surely, you have no other recourse but then to, and the directors. So things are opening up. It's not just stale museum theater, the way the shows are staged, the way that they've been cast. If any of you have seen recently the production of Romeo and Juliet that was on PBS, that the National Theater did, it looks like Britain. The stage looks like what the city, what the country looks like. France still has problems. Spain is a little bit better. But Britain, when I was in school in Britain, the National Theater and the Royal Shakespeare Company didn't look like what it looks like now. Now it looks like any other, you know, elementary or high school in particular, you know, cities in the country. So that's what's really happening now. And yeah, that's what's happening now. Basically.
Yeah, and the last question Steve asked was, what projects you're involved in here that you get excited about and how you're connecting with young people. And that would be the Odyssey Project and
well, it's the
Forward
Odyssey
Theater.
Forward Theater, doing talks like these that the university sponsors. I've done some of these Badger talks for high schools in the area. So it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. And then I'm going to do some talkbacks certainly for Forward Theater. That's great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and we'd like to keep in touch with you, Baron. If you're out in Monona, come by and say hi.
No, I'd like that very much. I mean, you know, this is how I get a chance to meet people. And, you know, there have been some tremendous people that have been very good to me in Madison, Wisconsin. And so anything I can do to spread some positive consciousness. We're living in these times today where it's just, yesterday, most of you are probably removed from this. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And I can't tell you how many committees I've been on and such where people are coming up with these DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusivity statements. And all of a sudden I told somebody last year, I said, wait a minute, I said, it took somebody's knee on another man's neck to all of a sudden wake you up and realize what's right and what's wrong. I can't help you. So the times that we're living in, but you know what it all boils down to? It all boils down to the work. It doesn't matter whether you're an academic or whatever. It's about the work. My grandmother always used to tell us, you know what? You got to do a little bit more. Got to do a little bit more.
Yep.
Don't just lie back and just do the bare minimum. And so maybe I've just taken that to heart. And so maybe that's why I'm sitting here now talking to you folks.
Well, we are definitely going to keep in touch because there's some people that want to connect with you. So what I will do is you can call the Monona Senior Center, and I will send you or email you the recording. Dina, how does that sound? I will email you the recording of today's event. And if people want to get in touch with you, Baron, how would they do that? The UW website?
Yeah, just Baron Kelly at wisc.edu.
That's his email, Edward was asking. So I'll make sure everybody can connect that wants to.
And also, I had a big relationship with the Children's Theater of Madison when I was here. Nancy Thoreau, one of the founders, was very important to me. As a matter of fact, I was brought back up here to do her elegy, or to officiate at her memorial ceremony in 2012. She was very important to me. Thank you very much.
Yes, we're going to see you. We're doing some intergenerational kind of ticket sponsors to children's theater for the fall, and hope to come and see Forward Theater this fall as well. So take care, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much.
Great summer.